Are we Ronies? What's up, guys? Your boy McKinley Crain here. Today I'm going to be doing my spoiler-free movie review of Morbius. Now let's get into it. So I saw this movie in theaters 2 weeks ago from today. I saw it on the day it came out. I actually still have the ticket. But I just haven't had a lot of time to do my review of it. But now I do have time to do my review of it, so now I'm going to be reviewing it. So this movie stars Jared Leto as Dr. Michael Morbius, who was diagnosed with like a rare blood disease when he was young, and basically spent his whole life trying to fix it, trying to find a cure. And he won like a Nobel Peace Prize for it, and he hadn't found a cure yet when he won the Nobel Peace Prize, but he had like invented some sort of like artificial blood, which is a pretty neat invention, pretty neat life-saving invention, as everyone can agree, most everyone. And one day he decides to get something that from bats in a foreign country, capture bats from a foreign country, and let's just say inject himself with some of their DNA and try to, I know it's confusing, but the movie kind of explains it, and try to cure himself. And while he's doing that, it turns him into a vampire, a living vampire. Anyway, this was a pretty good film. It's not a perfect film. It's technically an MCU movie. It's just not a mainline MCU movie, and it's set in the Venomverse universe in the MCU canon, but it's still an MCU movie. It's not the best MCU movie, but it's still a great MCU movie. There are no bad MCU movies, in my opinion. Jared Leto's acting is pretty good. It's great acting. His performance is generally convincing. He's pretty good as both Morbius the vampire and Morbius the doctor. He's pretty good at playing both of these personalities of this person, both sides of the personality of this person. Anyway, and I'm not exactly going to spoil who the villain is in this movie, but there is a villain in this movie. Like towards the beginning, the introduction of this character, it was mostly great, but there were some good but not great parts. And there was some good but not great acting towards the beginning. It was mostly great acting, but in the beginning, but there were some moments where I was just like, well, this is good acting, but it's not great acting, if you know what I mean. And most of this movie was great, but there were like, let's just say, there were moments of this movie that I thought were better than the others. Like, although this isn't a perfect movie, there were some perfect scenes in this movie, in my opinion. Like when Morbius starts discovering his powers, like, so like from a certain period in this movie, so in my opinion, when Morbius first becomes a vampire, up until he starts until he starts like communicating with his friend again. Um, well, when his friend visits him, that's that's a you know that's a perfect. Those are like that's a perfect. All those parts that I just mentioned were perfect. Were like 10 out of 10, 100% material. But it didn't stay like that for the whole movie. It was only like that for like 15 to 20 minutes. And from then on, it was great overall, but not as great as that time in the movie, if you know what I mean. Um, and there were some other things in this movie that I thought were good but not great, like the chemistry between Dr. Michael Morbius and his assistant. I can't remember her name, but she's his love interest in this movie, and they have good chemistry, but not like great chemistry, not like the best chemistry ever. But it still works and it's still good chemistry. The final fight is the final fight between Morbius and the villain is great overall, but like towards the end, it's good but not great. Um, and speaking of the fight scenes, the special effects and the action in this movie are great and pretty colorful and creative at times. And even though this is an action movie, there are some horror elements in this movie which I thought were were very well done and very effective. Um, and this movie had a pretty good soundtrack. Um, Now there were some like moments where the soundtrack was just ripping off of the Batman Begins soundtrack. Like it was so obvious, and there were some scenes with with like that music in playing during those scenes where you could like tell by the shots and by the music that like this movie was clearly ripping off of Batman Begins. But like they were doing it like they weren't like too bad while they were doing it. They kind of like ripped off another movie, but like while they were doing that, they made like they used what they ripped off to kind of like make their movie better, which I thought worked. And they didn't rip off of it like too much. They ripped off of Batman Begins at times, but not too much. Um, and this is a pretty solid Marvel movie with a pretty solid post credit scene. There are two post credit scenes. Yeah, there are. Um, People have been like crapping on these post credit scenes, but and a lot of stuff is left out of like these post credit scenes, like a lot of like questions that this movie just leaves the audience to answer for themselves. A lot of that stuff is like left out of the post credit scenes, but who cares? They were pretty good post credit scenes. They were great post. They were they weren't perfect post credit scenes, but they were great post credit scenes. I enjoyed them, and this wasn't a boring movie at all. I wasn't bored even once. It was actually pretty thrilling throughout, and pretty entertaining. And this movie felt less like a Marvel movie, in my opinion, and more like a monster movie. And it is both a monster movie and a Marvel movie. But it kind of felt more like a monster movie, and that's not a bad thing. It really benefited this movie. Um, that really benefits this movie. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, I think the reason why a lot of people are crapping on this movie is because they had to cut some of the stuff that they were advertising and saying was gonna like. They had to cut some of the stuff that they said was gonna be in the movie out of the movie to align with the events of No Way Home. Because because it was originally supposed to come out before No Way Home, and then it got delayed. No Way Home came out, and then they panicked and said, "Oh, we have to, fix this movie." And possibly because, and probably also because it got delayed like a long time, which is why everybody's crapping on it. Critics hate this film. Most of the critics hate this film, but the audience, most of the audience likes this film. I'm just judging this based off of the Rotten Tomato scores, but I don't know. Anyway, I would definitely recommend this movie. You might like it, you might not, but if you're like me, you'll probably like it. I, for one, really liked it, and I'm gonna give this movie an 88% out of 100%, which is the equivalent of an A-. Like, subscribe, join the notification squad. I will return.